the first Sunday of Christmas tide. As the rest of the world is packing up their Christmas stuff, the church is just beginning Christmas. We've been in Advent for 4 weeks. We've been preparing. We've been making ready. We're not ready to package up all this stuff. This is the part of the season. It's Christmas now. And this morning we turn to the second chapter of Matthew's Gospel. And I invite you to hear these words. Now, after they had left, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you. For Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother by night, and went to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." May God, the God who inspired such words, inspire us this day as we respond to these words of Scripture. Was the executive pastor when I was serving as a senior minister in Kansas City. Bob's a good guy. He is an amazing administrator. He's also a fabulous preacher. And Christmas one year, Bob preached a sermon in which he told a story from his own childhood. He was probably 7 or 8 years old, and his grandfather, for Christmas, gave him a handcrafted rocking chair. It was beautiful. His grandfather had spent months putting it together, getting it all ready for Bob. Well, Bob was thrilled, and all Christmas morning and early afternoon, as he was playing with his other toys, he would sit in the rocking chair, rocking back and forth. But being a kid, he also did some other things, including kind of spinning around. And at one point, he stuck his leg through the slats on the back side of the rocking chair and got his leg stuck. And he pulled and twisted, and nothing seemed to be able to set him free from the rocking chair. And as he continued to pull, his leg got bruised and started to swell. Finally, he cried out to his family, and they all came running in, and they found Bob stuck there, and they tried to pick up the rocking chair and pick him up and turn him and twist him. And nothing they did seemed to be able to set him free. Finally, his grandfather slipped out of the room and then came back with a saw in his hand. Bob saw the saw and burst into tears, not realizing his grandfather planned to cut one of the slats off. He assumed something else was going to be cut off. When Bob's mother realized what Bob thought and his tears were just flowing, she said, "Oh, Bobby, why would you think that we value the rocking chair more than we value you?" So often, when people feel trapped trapped. That experience of being confined has them feeling as if no one cares. And that only reinforces that idea that they have no value, that no one will come and rescue them. And let me tell you, there are so many people in the world who have that experience. Sisters and brothers who are struggling with an addiction. There are millions of women trapped by the sex industry. There are women living in abusive relationships. There are young people and old people who are held captive by the opinions that others have of them. There are those whose sense of self-worth doesn't allow them to even glimpse beyond the present moment, and they feel utterly hopelessness. There are those who are held tightly in this grip of fear or grief or sorrow. People feel shackled. Some of them are shackled. A woman by the name of Surrey Pick Locke found herself held hostage in a brothel in Cambodia. She described in the story being abused and tortured if she did not submit to the men who came to the brothel. And what was so troubling about her story is that it started before she turned 10 years old. But over time, she found a way out. She was freed from that time. But what's amazing, in her early 20s, she chose to return to that area and try to help others find freedom. I was struck by this little snapshot of an individual's life. A story that was horrifying and yet at the same time empowering and filled with hope. As this young woman went from being a slave to one who was liberated, to one who chose to go back and help others find that same experience. It is estimated that there are 27 million people around the globe today who are the victims of slavery. And not to diminish those who are in a physical experience of slavery, but I would say that there are millions more who find themselves trapped, who find themselves enslaved, held by some other power that does not allow them to live the life that God desires for them to live. My guess, you know someone who's trapped, who feels enslaved, who's having an experience of being caught in the tight grip of some power that is out of their control. Some of you may know that experience firsthand. It might be physical, it might be spiritual, it might be emotional. But to those folks and to us, I offer this wonderful story out of Matthew's Gospel. Matthew's Gospel, known as the Jewish Gospel. Believe that the author of this Gospel was probably a Jewish Christian, maybe even a scribe. And it's a wonderful way that he structured the Gospel into 5 different sections to depict the Pentateuch, or the 5 books of Torah. The central readings within the Jewish tradition, what we know as Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. To those people, to that audience that would have come out of the Jewish tradition, this story from the early part of Matthew's Gospel would have perked their ears, because they would have recognized the story. Except that the way that it's told in Matthew's Gospel, it's in a different context and has its own unique spin to it. Yet, they would have recognized it as the story of the Exodus, but in reverse. For if you know the story of the Exodus, you know that it was a time in was threatening to kill all the newborn boys. And Moses is saved. But as he grows up, an event happens that he has to flee Egypt. But while outside of Egypt, God calls him, and he returns to Egypt, where he proclaims liberation and leads the people to their freedom. Well, for those Jewish Christians, hearing this story, in the early part of Matthew's Gospel, a story about not Pharaoh, but Herod, who is threatening to kill the young children. And the Holy Family flees not from Egypt, but to Egypt. And if you go on to read the story beyond what we read this morning, what you find is that child that escaped potential death will return and proclaim liberation and lead people to the promises of God. The author of Matthew wants to create within his reader this sense of expectation of who this child is. This child is the new Moses, the one who will set his people free. And the God that we meet in this story out of Matthew is the same God that heard the cries of the people in Egypt who were enslaved and called forth one, Moses, to again proclaim liberation and to lead the people to freedom. Jesus comes along and becomes the new Moses, as Matthew's Gospel depicts it. But it's not just liberation for a chosen group. It is liberation. It is hope. It is possibility for all humanity. And what I love about Matthew's Gospel, from this point on, there are just snapshots, one after another, that give us this sense of God's love, the power of love to change lives, to break the bonds of suffering and grief, the power of love to tear down walls of rejection and loneliness, the power of love to liberate the addicted, to liberate those who have no sense of hope in their life. They're like little images that just come into our lives, all set up by this expectation, this story, that this child born to Mary and Joseph will be the new Moses. When I was in college, my Aunt Vashta, who at the time was living in Janesville, Wisconsin, would send me postcards every once in a while. Usually postcards from her travels. Sometimes it was a trip just 100 miles down the road. Other times it was with her daughter all the way over to Europe. She'd send me these postcards with just a few words scribbled on the back. Usually the first sentence or two was an explanation of where she was or what she was doing. And then the next two sentences would be how, at least in her own way, she would spin that experience to offer me a word of encouragement, to offer me a word of hope. 9 out of 10 of them were kind of cheesy, to be honest. But I was amazed at how often those postcards would arrive at just the right time. I was feeling down. I was feeling trapped. I was feeling overwhelmed by the tests or the homework or whatever, and that postcard would arrive. And I'd be reading about her experience at some cathedral in Europe, and she would then spin it around in some sort of marvelous way to give me a word of encouragement. Well, throughout the season of Advent, we've been talking about these postcards from the journey, our journey to the manger. These little hints along the way that prepare us for this wonderful gift that is coming into the world. Well, what Matthew does, in light of our experience in the manger, in light of the gift that has come into the world, all of a sudden, as we read further and further into Matthew's Gospel, we find more of these hints, these postcards, these little images that announce to us the amazing power of God's liberating love that has entered the world through Jesus Christ. It's an amazing experience for those of us who feel trapped, who feel confined, who feel enslaved by some power that is out of our control. But let me tell you, it's not just about being on the receiving end. It's also about sharing those postcards, if you will, with others. And that's what happens in so many amazing ways around Cypress Street Christian Church. Our prison ministry goes and works with women who are in prison, who are behind bars. But for so many of them, it's not just physical imprisonment. It is struggles that they are having in their own lives where they feel emotionally or spiritually imprisoned. There are those in the life of our congregation who volunteer with our partner school, Kaiser Elementary, who go and work with young people, many of them who have difficult family lives, and they too feel hopeless, they feel trapped, and yet somebody out of nowhere appears and gives them a word of encouragement, who walks with them for a little while and demonstrates the power of that liberating love. There are those in our congregation who volunteer with NAM's Family Violence Shelter. There are those who work with IHM, the Ministry to the Homeless, coming alongside people, speaking a word, giving them a glimpse, if you will, that is hopeful, that is liberating, that says to them, it's possible. It's possible to be set free from these experiences that you are currently having. Ricky Sims was a football player at the University of Nebraska in the early 80s. Now, being a kid who grew up in Nebraska, and unlike Texas and other parts of the country where there are multiple college teams and professional teams, when you're in Nebraska football, that's not it. And so you are obsessed with football, and I was. And I knew Ricky Sims. He was an amazing wide receiver. He went on to play some professional football, made some good money, but somewhere along the line, he also became addicted to drugs. And part of the way through his professional career in football, he gave it up so that he could pursue his real passion, which was drugs. He had numerous run-ins with the law, and finally he got arrested on a charge that put him in jail for a long time. His father had been a middle school principal, his mother a social worker, people of deep faith, and they tried to encourage him. But now that he was in prison in his mid-30s, his parents were deceased, and he was alone. Nobody came to visit. Nobody sent notes. And I tell you, not only was he imprisoned, but he was in prison, emotionally, spiritually. And then out of nowhere, he got a little note card. And he opened up the envelope and he looked inside of it and it read, "Dear Ricky, I know your parents believed in you. I believe in you. Upon your release, if there is anything I can do to help you, just call me. Signed, Tom Osborne." The guy had been the football coach at the University of Nebraska, been the athletic director there. And Ricky was so stunned that somebody of such importance would remember him, let alone know where he was, and take the time to send him that note. And as Ricky tells it, in that moment of finishing reading that note, he dropped to his knees and he began to pray. And that note, that time of prayer, created for him a window of hope, a window of opportunity, and he began to believe that this imprisonment that he experienced, the physical imprisonment, but also the spiritual and emotional imprisonment, that he could be set free from it. Now, 4 years after leaving prison, Ricky is a professional counselor, working and running an outpatient treatment center for those who are addicted. He also goes and he speaks, he tells his stories. He offers, if you will, using my language, offers them little postcards from his journey that give hope, that speak possibility in the midst of those moments where people are utterly helpless. We need to speak those words. We need to give witness to not only the stories in Scripture, but our own experiences of liberation, of freedom, of being released from bondage. And we all know those folks. We have contact with them all the time, people who are hurt, who are broken, who feel announce to them the good news that the one who came as a child was, as Matthew described it, the new Moses, who would proclaim a liberating love, but also would lead all of humanity into the promises of God. We need to be a people who share that word, who offer that witness, who are willing to proclaim that message wherever we might go. Because goodness knows, there's plenty of folks out there that need to hear it. But let me add, I think we all need to hear it. Because there are things, powers and principalities, that sometimes hold us really tight. And that's not the life that God desires for any of us. Any of us to live. Let us pray. God of liberating love, the one who called forth Moses to emancipate an enslaved people, who brought forth Jesus to redeem and rescue all humanity. We come here this day to hear again those stories of deliverance, and offer our own witness to the way love has set us free. As we prepare to move into a new year, we take the time to give thanks for the way you, God, the way you have accompanied us upon our journey. When fear has engulfed us, when grief has enveloped us, you have been there. When anger or sadness or whatever difficulty it might be has consumed us, you have been the one to guide us toward healing, toward freedom, towards reconciliation. In the same way that you journeyed with the people centuries ago, we pray, God, that you will journey with us with the same passion, that we might truly understand what it means to be a liberated people. God, there are many within our congregation who are in need of prayer, who are in need of a word of hope when they feel trapped by sickness, by brokenness. God, we lift up before you Sharon, Jimmy, Linda, Tom, Dave, Ann, Beverly, Margie, Bob, Debbie. There are so many others, God, people we don't even know about, and yet you are the one who has already started to act. But where we can help, call us to be a witness. Call us to be an example. Invite us to be the people who send a little card. Maybe it is a physical postcard, or maybe it is our lives, which give another human being a glimpse of what is possible in and through you. We offer these words in your most holy name, and in the name of that wonderful gift,